The United States as leader. There is a point in political theory in which events have confirmed the position adopted above. A universal government would have to be a particular government, rooted in the generative order of history, and not an alliance of sovereign states or a universal parliament. The League of Nations was stillborn, and when it had been buried, almost the same group of victorious powers that had blindly set up the Organization of United Nations on the same blind principles. They even introduced the old Polish system of an individual right of veto for each of the great powers, as if to make executive impotence not only constitutional, but expressly intended and prized. Yet this impotence had a vital nerve in it. A decision cannot be universally satisfying unless it is unanimous, and Russia had already established at home the ideal of unanimity and the practice of autocratic government to impose that unanimity by education and training, or, failing that, by terror. Russia, too, had been the most brilliant of victors in the Second War, and Stalin had once adopted the policy of vetoing everything that did not conduce to the extension of communist domination. Here, then, is one living and powerful government, strongly national in its central seat and in its leading members, but theoretically liberal in the treatment of other nationalities and languages. At the same time, there is a militant thirst for the political assimilation of all peoples to the social regimen of Russia, which in that claim forfeits all rational authority. Rational authority, according to my analysis, can accrue to governments only insofar as they represent the inescapable authority of things, that is to say, of the material conditions of free life and free action. In the Marxist theory, this almost seems to be involved in its materialistic character, yet in Russian practice, it is not the authority of things, but nominally the material class interests and militant will of the proletariat, and really the ambition of the self-appointed inner circle of the Communist Party that not only rule absolutely, but intend to keep the whole world unanimous by liquidating all the sentience. And half by the wonderful power of propaganda and mass suggestion, and half by systematic extermination of all other ways of thinking, this artificial unanimity has actually seemed to cover vast regions of Europe and Asia like a blanket of Siberian snow. The depth of it is unknown, but the silence is impressive. It is not, then, by the authority of universal physical conditions of existence that the Russian government would exercise control of all nations in military and economic matters. It would be rather by a revolutionary conspiracy fomented everywhere that it would usurp a moral and intellectual domination over all human societies. Such baseless pretensions cancel the right which economic science might have to guide universal material economy. What fitness have the United States, which have now come forward as a rival, to become the secular arm of reason in checking the unreason of the world? I had not, in 1934, ventured to name the United States as one of the powers that might be entrusted with that universal political duty. The American people had refused to join the League of Nations, more by an instinct of general distrust than by an insight into the folly of expecting an assembly of sovereign powers to possess or to carry out a consistent policy. The prevalence of a representative government and the habit of being docile to majorities when no fundamental interests were at stake made Americans slow to feel that danger, and it was under this domestic illusion that, in 1946, a replica of the rejected and extinct League of Nations, with the aggravating feature of right to veto for each of the great powers, was established under American leadership on American soil. Except for that veto, which at once paralyzed all decisive action, it would have been natural for the United States to have begun to offer its own forces, then very strong and fit to carry out the decrees of the universal authority. This authority indeed, would have been little but a course to approve, or at most to retard by some accidental scruple the special foreign policy of the United States. At the same moment, by the unprecedented election of a president for a third and fourth term of office, and by an immense extension and elaborate organization of all the departments of state, the American government was becoming an automatic power, far more intelligent and determined than any floating and temporary majority in Congress. So that a traditional government comparable to the Roman might have arisen in the United States and might have legally and by general consent have established its universal jurisdiction. Would such an American hegemony have operated justly and deserved to endure? There are several respects to which it would seem eminently capable of doing so. In the first place, the American people are good. Their mentality is settled and pervasive. They are devoted and ingenious in improving the instruments and methods of material economy, and it is precisely in this sphere that they would have been called upon to act for the welfare of all mankind. They would have done so honestly, diligently, guided by experts in every department, and while a cumbrous official system, with much pedantry and delay, and some false and premature theories, might have intervened, there need not have been in their government that open, perhaps unconscious, selfishness which many imperial governments have shown in the past. And this not because Americans are superhumanly unselfish, but because in questions of universal peace and universal trade, their self-interest coincides with that of all other nations, or would at least do so if it were clearly understood and strictly confined to material economy. But would an American management of international affairs be really confined to the economic sphere? It is no doubt the desire to keep American enterprise alive and progressive by establishing everywhere rational commercial relations advantageous to both sides that fundamentally inspires what the Russians call American imperialism. But quickness and sagacity in the economic arts are human virtues, and in the human psyche, which is the agent in politics, they cannot stand alone. By the obvious well-being which they bring, they breed self-satisfaction and complacency. And the technically just believe that rational trade is profitable, even to the less enterprising party, excites a pleasing passion for doing good. And there are so many other goods, like education and training, that help to secure prosperity, and in turn are favored by it. The authority that controlled universal economy, if it were in American hands, would irresistibly tend to control education and training also. It might set up, as was done in the American zone in occupied Germany, a cultural department with ideological and political propaganda. The philanthropic passion for service would prompt social, if not legal, intervention in the traditional life of all other nations, not only by selling their innumerable American products, but by recommending, if not imposing, American ways of living and thinking. Now, this is perhaps unintentionally to transgress the limits of rational control and to exercise an influence that may be justly resented. If you wish to practice a mechanical art, the expert mechanic can rationally teach you how to do it. But if you wish to think or to practice a liberal art, another man, because he is self-satisfied, must not run up unasked and tell you to do it, otherwise than your vital liberty directs. The restraints that circumstances and the nature of things impose on your will may be kindly pointed out to you before you commit yourself to a hopeless course, but the choice of your way must be left to you, if the authority that controls society is rational and friendly. If, for instance, some community preferred not to trade at all, seeing that it could live suitably on native products, the universal government ought to limit its action in regard to that community to preventing their interference with the peace and liberty of their neighbors. It is a government, not a religion with a militant mission, that is demanded. It comes to serve and to keep order, not to dominate where it has no moral roots. The British Empire, which was not founded or held exclusively for economic reasons, had a way of governing at once more reserved and more spectacular than the American system seems likely to be. There was military pomp and official grandeur about it, and the sportsmen of aristocratic breeding who chiefly carried it on meddled as little as possible with the natives. If the measures dictated to them from Whitehall were sometimes oppressive and designed to maintain British trade, even perhaps in opium, the thoughts of the military men and civil servants who actually governed were fixed rather on national prestige and on home and family affairs. It was as Englishmen that they fought and ruled, not as experts in an impartial international economy. The very idea of a rational moral regimen for mankind was unknown to them, and they quite naturally associated prosperity rather with brave military enterprise than, as Americans naturally associate it, with a rising volume of irresistible trade. The fruits of monopolist adventure and of incessant mechanical invention have dangled in America before the eyes of ambitious youth and of capitalist old age. It was a world in progress, and ulterior repercussions and settlements were not considered. The militancy of trade and of political reform seemed vital and almost normal, and undoubtedly it lent a speed and brilliancy to the growth of industry and of wealth in the 19th century, which seemed to contemporaries an unmixed good to be pursued and intensified forever. It is only now that the multiplication of mechanisms has become a nightmare. Omnipresent advertisements, a plague. The overgrown proletariat, a quicksand beneath the feet of wealth, and the hierarchy of occupations, a reversion to a sort of serfdom. In Europe, this tragedy of commercialism is perceived. In America, it seems to rumble still invisible below the horizon. But it may be a serious question whether a universal government in American hands would not attempt to revitalize the commercial optimism of the 19th century by the aid of new inventions and better coordination of resources. Or would it face the inevitable limit to industrial expansion and establish a stable economic order in a world where labor might again merge with self-rewarding arts and imagination turn from devising machines to cultivating liberal arts and enlarging moral freedom?